Welcome to day 4 of your ClickUp mini course. We've seen how to structure your ClickUp workspace, how to tailor it to your needs, and how your team works. Now we'll talk about task management. We'll understand what makes a good task, how you can create and assign tasks in ClickUp, what task planning means, how to break down your tasks, create checklists, custom fields, and relationships into tasks. Let's start off by the anatomy of a good task. A task in ClickUp is made of 4 items. The first, I call it base info. What has to be done, the status, who does it, when, how long, and how important it is. Moving on to the detailed info. That's where you add more details on your task if you need to. You can add description, fields, attachments, subtasks, and checklists. Then the activity area. That's where you can see all the history of a task, add comments, updates, or assignees. And finally, moving on to the relationship area. If you click that plus button in the activity area, you can link other tasks to this one. You can add waiting on or blocking tasks, dependencies, link documents, or any link on the web. Starting off with how to add a task, there are 3 ways to add a task. Number 1, straight from the list, and you just click add task here. Number 2, on top here, either by clicking add a task or by clicking new and then creating your task. Or you can just really quickly click T anywhere on ClickUp and create your task, like task example, and choose where you want to add it. You could add it either by default to where you are in ClickUp or to another list. Now for tasks to be relevant, it needs 3 items. And I would create a list view everywhere with these 3 items: assignee, due date, time estimate. If it doesn't have one of those, you can't make use of most of the ClickUp features, like dashboards, Gantt views, or workloads. Make sure that you add an assignee, a due date, and an estimate. Ideally, you could even add a start date to your tasks, which will be more relevant in the workload view area. When you plan a task, you could decide to define a start and end date, but you could also decide to make a task recurring. And that's a great way to standardize a process. The best view to plan a task is the timeline view. The timeline view will allow you to define start and end dates very easily by dragging and dropping the left and right side of a task. And you can also slide in a task if you know it's going to be pushed to later, and zoom out to be able to even push it to further and move the tasks on a larger timeline. A second way to do it is to make use of the Gantt view if you want to add subtasks and plan these subtasks by knowing the relationship they have with the parent tasks, which you can't really know in the timeline view. Finally, as we've seen, the list view is a great way to plan your tasks because you can just click on the due date and define the start and end date here, and even set your task to recurring, which we'll see in the next parts of the course. Getting back to our task example, we've defined our assignee, we've defined due dates, time estimates, and we have added subtasks to our task. When you create a task, the best way is to have the manager be an assignee of the task and have people that will execute the smaller actions in that task as assignees of the subtask. What you can do is just from the list view, assign people to smaller tasks. If you wanted to add a subtask to this task, you could just go to the parent task, click the plus icon here and say review post results, and that would be a subtask. You click enter, and then same way you can assign it to the person who has to do that. I also advise you to set due dates and time estimates on subtasks. The bigger your team gets, the more you have to make sure that these informations are filled. Otherwise, you start to lose control on your project management. Now that we've seen how to break in a task into subtasks, define assignees, due dates, estimates, we'll open up a task as an example. As you can see here, this task has a description. You can add other types of information. You could add action items. The difference between action items and subtasks is that subtasks act exactly like a task, meaning they can have an assignee, a priority, due date. You can open them up, add a description, you can go back to the parent task. Whereas checklists, you can just say this is done or not done and add an assignee. An example of a checklist action here is maybe proof, read, grammar, and you could assign that to someone. So you don't have to add subtasks necessarily. Subtasks are very handy if you want to see them below a task on your list view. Make sure you use the right one based on your use case and test and learn. Moving on to the Details tab. The Details allows you to add custom information that we've talked about yesterday or attachment to a task. You could attach something from your laptop or just add something from your cloud tool. Now that we've seen every detail of a task, we can know how it went through time. The activity allows you to see all the history of a task and track any changes that happen on the task. If I change the status here, you could see that this appears in the activity of the task. And if you mention someone on a task, you can see it appear here in the activity view and they can reply to you. That's very handy when it comes to collaborating together on a task and making it move forward. The last thing you can do on a task is to link it to other items. There are different ways to link it. You can either link it to a task just by a simple link or a dependency. You could say this task is blocking another one or waiting on another one, or you could also link another item. It could be a document or a link to another software or even a custom relationship. You could imagine creating a relationship between these blog posts that are in English to blog posts that are in French. So you could create a relationship called French version. And what you could do is specify that this is linked to another task in your workspace or a task in a specific list. So we'll choose to link it to a list called blogging that my French team works on. And then we'll create this relationship, which means that I can link this English version of my article to a French version of my article. We've seen everything you can do on the task, and I hope that makes you realize that there is a lot you can define in a ClickUp task. Make sure you define the right level on every single task on ClickUp. A rule that I have is that the task is refined enough if you have an assignee, start and end dates, and estimates. That's the bare minimum. And then you can add in more details as your team expands and you need to refine information better. In the next course, we'll see how you can customize some of these tasks to make sure they're consistent and automate that so that you can edit them once and use them forever.